Welcome to another broadcast of Philosophic Perspectives on the Artist First Radio Network. All past shows are archived, and you can pick them up at artistfirst.com. Now here's your host, Arthur D. Schwartz.
Hello. Happy New Year. Can I still say Happy New Year, or is that kind of passé because today is January 6th? Well, Happy New Year anyway. Good Lord, we certainly need a good year, don't we? The topic of today's show is From Inner Peace to World Harmony, subtitled The Principle of Holistic Ethics. So I'm a hypnotherapist, as you probably know, and also I'm a philosophical counselor. I combine the two, philosophical counseling and hypnotherapy. And like philosophy itself, there is a continuation or a continuum between the individual, the individual person and the philosophical issues that make that person an authentic, good, loving individual, or someone who goes in the other direction. And so the question is, does that extend to the society at large? I mean, of course, it does. But the theme that I'm going to address today is what I call the principle of holistic ethics. Because much like holistic health modalities, and things like, in Eastern medicine, the chakras, and in acupuncture, I think the channels, there's all this energy flow, and there can be blocks and barriers in the energy flow. And I've come, the evolution of my thought is that the field of politics and socioeconomics is not that dissimilar, really. That what the problem is in our world are these blocks. Just like we get sick when there are blockages in our physical, mental, and emotional being. There are blocks in the way societies and civilizations and the world, the way it's set up, that is causing a problem. So my book, Ethical Empowerment: Virtue Beyond the Paradigms, does go into that on in a number of different ways. And as I wrote the book, I more and more did form this idea of a holistic, a harmonic functioning. And so I think probably a good way to get into it is to just read a passage from it. And this chapter is called Social Harmonics. And I write, social harmonics may be compared to the clearing of physical, emotional, and mental blocks in an individual, as practiced, for example, by various holistic health modalities, in order to empower greater health and well-being. Ethical empowerment is both an individual and a social matter. A virtuous individual may exist in an unvirtuous society, but a virtuous society proactively empowers individuals with the potential of virtue. The empowerment of society is exemplified by the clearing of blocks so as to facilitate the mutual flourishing of both the individual and society. Now, I'm stopping my quotation now and just commenting that, yes, it's one thing about a harmonic functioning of society is to look at the individual and society and realize that they both have their needs that are reciprocal but different at the same time. And I think many times the problem is because that reciprocity, that harmonic balance, really is very much out of whack. As a matter of fact, we clearly see a socialistic point of view or a libertarian point of view being polar opposites. And the truth is, from my point of view, is that they both have some things that are really quite correct and other things that are incorrect. And I think that makes sense, that one of the great disharmonies has to do with, an extreme ideological view of the individual and or of the society. And from that point, nothing really seems to work right. And so the question is, how do you balance it? Now, I'm actually looking at this chapter I wrote. I mean, I talk about Herbert Spencer, who's considered to be often the first libertarian, and he believed in almost no government interference whatsoever, like most libertarians. And it's actually a nice idea if it worked, but unfortunately, I don't think it does. We need something more balanced than that. And so, how do you get that balance? Well, I think the balance does come from the concept of love. Love is very much concerned with the individual and with society. Love is about loving your neighbor, but also about loving yourself. And so it seems to me the task is to figure out what that means in context. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Self-love is good. Now, self-love doesn't mean self-adulation. I mean, it just means self-love like a parent would love her child. So that's the way we need to love ourselves, too, with nurture, with care, with consideration, with respect, with strength, with inspiration, with wisdom. Just the way you treat another person, that's the way you want to treat yourself. And so if we actually follow that direction, maybe, just maybe, through love, we might find a truly harmonic society, a balanced society, a holistic society. I think holistic ethics has something to do with that. But I'll get to I'll come back to that later on in today's program. So that's the thing, to figure out what are the blocks that need to be cleared. It is an orientation too much towards the individual, too much towards the society. But of course, it's much more complicated than that, isn't it? Now, basically, just like when you have blocks and barriers in an organism and it's affecting the health of a person, for example, there are blocks that create disunity, unnecessary disunity. If when an individual gets sick, it's generally because some part of that individual is not working properly. It's running, it's something that's dysfunctional. Something's not working right. Something's out of balance. And so, how do you restore that balance? Well, in the case of society, what is the imbalance? Well, there are many, many imbalances, aren't there? Many imbalances. But I would like to start off with three. In fact, in chapter 2.44, that's the 44th section of the second part, it's entitled Beyond Disunity. And in that section, I talk about three disunities, or the triadic disunities, the great triadic disunities. And while there are more disunities and more, things that are causing the disunification of the human race than just these three, I think these three are the big ones. And so my triadic disunities are political parties, religion, and the nation state. Yeah, so that's a small subject. That's not very big. Political parties, religion, and the nation state. So I am sure that over the history of the human race, those three great institutions, political parties, religion, and the nation state, played a very important role. I think political parties have had their place in the past. I think certainly religion has had its place in the past to teach humanity certain moral lessons. And the nation state, I think, also has served a useful function. However, I'm not so sure about the status today, even in the case of the nation state. Now, as a philosopher, or as philosophers, we have the liberty to be idealistic. We have the liberty to talk, to look at the distant future, and to see what kind of world we want to see. So if I'm saying some things today that are very impractical, I know that, but I'm looking to the future. I'm looking far ahead. And what kind of world are we really working towards? Do we really look forward to a world which is broken up by nation states? Now, I think diversity is a good thing. Multiculturalism is a good thing. I don't think we ever want to do away with the different cultural proclivities of individual people. That will always be a part of humanity. No matter, and I think always there will always be cultural distinctions, no matter how small the world becomes. Because you know why? Because you can have cultural differences, within a small territory, within a company, within a town. People develop culture. So cultures are there to stay, and that's a good thing. The question is nation states, which seem to cause all kinds of havoc. Now, they also do a lot of good. I mean, let's face it, they do a lot of good, but they also do a lot of harm. And so I think one of the things I want to address today are some of the good things about the nation state and some of the bad things about the nation state, and think of what it would be, what a world would be like in the future without a nation state, and is it possible for a world without a nation state to be a peaceful, flourishing, free, diverse world? Because I personally believe that you don't need nation states to have diversity. Actually, it's probably the reverse. But hopefully I'll get to that later. Well, now we have the other one I mentioned is religion. I mean, do I have to argue the point that religions divide? I mean, does that really have to be discussed and argued? So the notion of we see around the world constantly religious factions, people from different religions and factions therein, fighting and killing, and it's just incredible. And why? I mean, I know it sounds naive, of course, but I don't really why. None of us know, the thing is, knowing, having the idea that you can know your maker, know God or the universal principle or whatever you want to call it, to the extent that you will kill somebody because he doesn't share your view of God, that is just insanity. There's no other way of putting it. It's insane. The collective insanity. Now, insanity is basically irrationality. Philosophy is the quest for the rational. One of my definitions of philosophy is that philosophy is the pursuit of rational perspective. Yeah, the pursuit of rational perspective, which implies rational perspectives. There doesn't have to be one perspective. There can be many rational perspectives. And there can certainly be many irrational perspectives. Now, I would say religion borders on the line of irrational perspectives, always, because they always try to say just a little bit too much for my taste. I like the insight. I like the wisdom. I like the lessons. But when it crosses the line and tells me what God is and what He's telling you to do, that's what I would call irrational. You know, the schizophrenic who ends up at, shows up at the hospital, psych ward, because he thinks he's Jesus. It's a common phenomena, things like that. People call him insane. What's really the difference about everybody else who thinks that they know they're going to tell you who God is? Now, if you want to keep it to yourself and your own private belief, fine. But when you start making it some kind of when you start looking down on people, when you start acting with prejudice against people because they have a different view of God, then I would actually say that is insane. And so I guess there's a lot of insanity in the world, a lot of division in the world. I think religion is really good when it's put in its proper place. But when it tries to be something that it's not, then it becomes irrational and dangerous. But then again, of course, I could say the same for science. So religion doesn't have a monopoly on a penchant for irrationality. Well, now let's get to the political parties. Need I talk about it? What we're seeing now? It's become a joke. I'm a Washingtonian, George Washington, who recommended in his farewell address, beware of the political parties. He saw it. He realized that it's just divisiveness for the sake of divisiveness. We see it in America all the time. When another party takes over the presidency, the two sides tend to swap sides, and they start, defending or opposing what they were the previous year, doing the opposite. And it's just because, basically, the party wants to get reelected or get elected. And it's absolutely ridiculous and asinine. And you know what? I think, of the three triadic disunities, the political party, religion, and the nation-state, the political parties are going to be the first to fall. Because we don't need them anymore. We really don't. And there's a movement afoot around the country in certain places, I think in California, I think possibly in Washington State, or is it Oregon, where they have these non-partisan primaries now. And I'm not even sure if the candidates have the party label. Some of them might. But it's on one primary ballot, and there's a runoff between the top two. And that's a very common process in many cities. I know in my area, Boston, the Boston primaries works that way. There are no parties, even though Boston's very democratic, of course. The primary for mayor is just one primary, and the top two run off, and I don't believe their party affiliation is on the ballot. I think that actually is the model, but I mean it has to go much further, because what we're talking about is having a non-partisan system, or what I would call a no-party system, a truly independent political system, is a system that, if done properly, will create a motivation and an inspirational frame for the development of statesmen rather than politicians. Because isn't that what we need, statesmen? Now, of course, I have a long-term opposition to the nation-state, so perhaps I'm being contradictory, but we'll get to that, hopefully, before today's show is out. But political parties, religion, nation states, they are the three great disunities. And so let's see if I'm going to read a little something here. Authors of utopian visions have imagined a world of society or societies in which harmony and peace reign and harmonic potential flourishes. However, a closer look reveals that the basis of utopias is often a morally incoherent and harmonically imbalanced communistic, example looking backward, the novel Looking Backward, or laissez-faire, for the example, with the example Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, or laissez-faire vision of a perfect society. So I just read that again. However, a closer look reveals that the basis of utopias is often a morally incoherent and harmonically imbalanced communistic or laissez-faire vision of a perfect society. And I have little doubt that some of my readers may interpret many of the ideas presented in my book as utopian or impossibly unrealistic. However, while I believe that the changes that I propose can be refined, implemented, and phased in, I have no illusion that the world's problems would suddenly vanish. I do not necessarily believe in utopias or their desirability, but I do believe that ethical empowerment and virtue are attainable by removing disharmonic blocks that stand in the way of human self-realization. So what's standing in the way are these disunities. It's these disunities, religion, political parties, and the nation state. Let's see if I have something I want to just quote here real quickly. Well, the disunity of the system of nation states perpetuates gross moral incoherencies. On all scores, dualistic fairness, dualistic beneficence, and dualistic compassion is the nation state failing, and failing badly. On the face of it, the notion that each nation state has autonomy and therefore that criminal and grotesque injustices are allowed to continue for years or even generations would be comparable to a hands-off attitude by police to domestic criminals, because after all, they are autonomous human beings. This may sound like an advocacy that America, or if not America, some other nation, act as policemen of the world. However, this is not the case. America's hyperactive military policies, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are bankrupting the nation and helping to drive its economy into a shadow of its former self. America can no longer and never could afford to be the policeman of the world, but we do need to recognize that the system of nation states in itself tends to justify the unjustifiable. National sovereignty is a filthy joke when it becomes the protectorate of evil. And so, you see, yeah, you have criminals in nation states, and yet, you know, we just have to leave it be because, you know, it's a different country, and countries, after all, have a right. They're sovereign. They have their laws, and so they can do whatever the heck they want to do. And that's, on the face of it, irrational. So in the future, I don't favor a world government, because a world government would not work. It would be repressive. It would be undemocratic, and enslave the world's population. However, a world government doesn't have to be that way. I should say, rather, a world society. A world society of interdependent localities or regions is where I think the world is eventually going to end up, with greater freedom. And I would add, I'm not even in favor of, you might know, of a unitary monetary system. that would have many different monetary systems, because a single unitary monetary system is just unworkable, as, for example, we're seeing in Europe right now, because they have the same currency for poor nations and rich nations, and it's not it doesn't really work. It causes dramatic imbalances and burdens on the rich, and extreme debt on the poorer countries. So that's not the answer. The answer is not some monolith or some leviathan, some huge national, worldwide government. No, but the answer is in a cooperative, harmonic, working entity, just like a human being, with its limbs and its brain and its eyes and its sense organs and all the all the different aspects of an organism that work together in harmony with each other. The nation-state system is like, I guess, chopping off your arms and chopping off your legs and say, well, we got 4 parts. Well, maybe that's not the greatest analogy, but I think I'm making the point. E pluribus unum, out of many one. There can be great diversity and great variation in certain norms, but yet a continuity that is based on love, which would guarantee, of course, the opportunities for health, opportunities to receive just and fair treatment by the law, opportunities for education. And it would also be a world in which the absolutely imbalanced tilt on resources, the unfair inequality in resources, will be resolved. That's right. You're sitting on a land that's filled with oil, so therefore they have a right to that oil, and the one is sitting in a barren country don't. And so is that in any sense justice? Is because some one particular country happens to be lucky because they got oil beneath underground? There'll come in a day in the not too distant future where oil isn't going to be worth much because it's going to be superseded by other forms of energy. Yes, that day is coming. And then maybe they'll look at it differently. But the idea of natural resources, you see, these are blocks. These are barriers. I'll tell you another block that's not part of the triadic unities, the 3 basic disunities I'm talking about. The other one is real estate. A huge bottleneck of capital. Huge. I'm sounding like Trump now, aren't I? Huge. But it is. It needs to be liquidated. Its owners need to be fairly compensated, I would say even above fair market value. But a system needs to move forward that transitions it into public property. The economy will soar because liquidity would be unleashed into the world markets, and taxes will be eliminated and replaced with rent, and it will change the world for a better. There will be far more freedom, no more burdensome internal revenue service and the like in different countries, looking over your shoulder, because revenue from real estate will simply replace tax. And that's a really huge bottleneck as well. And if anyone is interested, that argument I make is chapter chapter 2.24 through 2.28. That's the chapter is section 224 through section 228. It's entitled "Ending Taxation," and it goes over that whole argument. I look a lot at Henry George and Herbert Spencer, who had earlier ideas of that theme. They don't go nearly as far as I do, though. It's different, but I actually had come up with that idea when I was writing this a few years ago, and I hadn't even been aware of Henry George and Herbert Spencer's argument. But I was watching on PBS some kind of antique show, and they were referring to the Georgists, or meaning Henry George. I looked into it and I discovered, wow, here's somebody, and he was a major figure. Henry George actually almost became mayor of New York City. So, and it was also a very big move in the land campaign, or the campaign to make land public. It was not really buildings, but land in Great Britain during the 19th century was a big, actually, a very large campaign that made quite a bit of headway, but obviously eventually did not succeed. But I believe that there's it's called Georgism, there's various terms for that type of thinking, and I think we are going to eventually go in that direction because eventually the economic forces that would be released into the market will be unprecedented and lead to unprecedented worldwide economic flourishing. Okay, on that point, we're going to take a break. I think I'm probably over, but we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
In Ethical Empowerment, Virtue Beyond the Paradigms, Arthur D. Schwartz presents an ethical theory that is a framework for evaluating moral conundrums that go beyond legalistic rulemaking, dogmatism, and preconditioned thinking. The book is as much an ethical framework for unconventional ideas as it is for staying with convention. Ethical Empowerment is a manifesto of non-doctrinaire perspective. Ultimately, the hypnotic thinking of ideology and dogmatism can only be overcome by returning to the true source and essence of morality, which is nothing less than universal love. Discover how the philosophically liberating approach of the ethical empowerment can be applied to the range of ethical, social, and political controversy. Read about a plan to eliminate all political parties. Entertain the possibility of an overhaul of the patent system and its replacement with a system that rewards inventors while eliminating monopolistic control of patents and technological suppression. Many other transformative ideas are discussed in the book, including issues related to the monetary system, real estate, scientific paradigms, and a rational approach to conspiracy theory. While ethical empowerment will challenge your mind to consider new perspectives, the ethical challenge is always to keep the diversity, depth, and breadth of perspective within the boundaries of love. Ethical Empowerment is available at Amazon.com and most online booksellers in both print and e-book editions. You are listening to Philosophic Perspectives on the Artist First Radio Network. Let's get back to your host, Arthur D. Schwartz.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. Now, as I was getting on my diatribe about real estate, another one of my pet blocks is the currency market. I've talked about that in other shows. So I basically have this ethical holism. I call it ethical holism in some places, and in a slightly different context, I call it social harmonics. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the chapter ethical holism. Attempts to isolate a single unitary motive for human behavior have long occupied philosophers and psychologists. And it should not be surprising if these attempts have resulted in a good deal of dogma and many dead ends for the intellect. Nietzsche's will for power is less susceptible to hardened ideology. It is difficult, if not impossible, to deny that human beings, if not all forms of life, manifest what could be called a will to power. Every rational being wants to see a world organized or structured in accordance to his or her will. Needs for pleasure as well almost certainly are subsumed by a presumptive will to power, and therefore Freudian thinking, as in Adler's case, need not be inconsistent with the will to power. Nietzsche idealized a noble class that to him evoked Homeric ideals such as courage, strength, self-reliance, and self-realization. It embodies a philosophy of overcoming adversity and saying yes to life, and a master or noble ethic that he contrasts to a Judeo-Christian ethic that he argues is based upon resentment or a perspective of victimization. Nietzsche attempted to compensate for the absence of compassion and altruism in his ethics by rationalizing the necessity of noblesse oblige. But the rationalization reveals fundamental flaws in Nietzsche's conception of morality. Like other philosophers who overemphasize the ego at the expense of concern for others, he is often blind to the dualistic nature of morality and the need for a thorough balancing of the moral elements. The balancing of the diversity of moral elements and principles may be described as holistic ethics. So it's a balancing of the different elements which I go into in chapter 1.7 actually, the basic ethical dualisms. And it's a balancing of these, of fairness, beneficence, and compassion. So that's 6 poles. Self-regarding beneficence, other regarding beneficence, self-regarding fairness, other regarding fairness, self-regarding compassion, other regarding compassion. So there's 6, and these balancing of these forces, you might say, and how they interrelate with the outside world and with intentionality as well as effectuality are the seeds, I think, of ethical holism. Now, a holistic ethics constantly deliberates and harmonizes intentionality and effectuality. The oscillating permutations of the self-other duality and of subsidiary dualisms and the impact of moral coherencies and incoherencies on social institutions. A failure in any part of a holism may range from minor to catastrophic. A malfunctioning organ, an imbalanced diet, biochemical imbalances, emotional stress or turmoil, inadequate physical activity or overuse and excess, dependency on drugs and pharmaceuticals can result in bad health. Moral health, likewise, is subject to dangerous and degenerative imbalance. Maximal health begins with a nutritious and balanced diet, and moral health begins with the everyday sustenance gotten by reinforcement of good intention. Moral health, like physical health, is a complex balancing of many principles, and both moral and physical well-being are frequently compromised with misapplications of the conventional wisdom. The struggle to find equilibrium between The competing claims of self and other expressed within the basic ethical dualisms is not a unitary principle of human motivation, but rather an ethical resonance that modulates and transforms the enslavement of the passions into moral understanding and, if we are fortunate, into wisdom. I'm going to just continue reading. The holistic perspective humbles as much as it empowers. Within each individual resides the potential for both humility and greatness. The surrendering of and detachment from possessions that to some may define their very being can paradoxically empower and enrich. But empowerment can bring with it new attachments in the form of formalities and possessions that are both material and intellectual. Heraclitus was right when he said that the world is in a state of constant change, but Parmenides and the Eleatic philosophers were also correct because, in another sense, nothing changes without a sense of changelessness. Change becomes incomprehensible. Some moral philosophers have called this unchangeable essence the soul or the world soul, but I don't have a metaphysical conception of it, except that I know that the only constancy of experience is love, and it is the task of ethics to better understand it. Love is the crown jewel of consciousness. Theoretical physics has not yet conclusively answered the question of whether the ultimate basis of matter is divisible or indivisible, but nonetheless the nature of the human mind is to analyze so that we capture some level of understanding regardless how meager. And I suspect that love is indeed indivisible, and so the basic ethical dualisms that I'm speaking about are merely a meager effort to analyze the basic moral essence or love. In other words, what I'm saying there is that what the schema that I came up with in the basic ethical dualism, I'm not pretending that that's the absolute end of the story, but they're practical concepts to deal with the essence of morality as I have construed it. To summarize, I am quite comfortable describing human motive as a striving or acting out of a will to power. But maximal power itself must of necessity embody the breadth of morality because morally incoherent motives will in the end implode or cancel each other and disassemble. Morality, as Aristotle said, is the flourishing of humanity both individually and collectively, and from our view is also the harmonic expression of the basic moral forces. Humility is required. Only a consciousness of humility can avail itself to the breadth and scope of human wisdom. Through humility, we open our minds as well as our hearts, detach from egoistic obstructions, and tap into the potentiality of greatness. Through humility, wisdom from the ancient past can be accepted, and future awakenings will emerge. And so there, you can see that I'm touching on, I'm kind of linking holistic ethics, social harmonics, harmonic life to greatness. And that's what it's all about. You know, we have all these superheroes and all this, and these are just fantasies, of course, but why are they so popular? Why? Because they work on the imagination. None of us can be Superman and fly like a speeding bullet and have X-ray vision and all that. But these superheroes inspire us to do things that may have seemed impossible to us to do. And a harmonic society, a holistic society, a society that is governed by the harmonic forces that is embodied in love itself, is going to be a great society because of the love of self and the love of other. Greatness is not In history, it's been perverted. Like Hitler and the Third Reich and all that, and greatness was and other empires and other militaristic cultures considered greatness as conquering others. But that's because they were irrational, sick people who gained the reins of power. But greatness, in its true sense, is a beautiful thing. I once had an argument with one of my groups. I was having an argument about you wouldn't call Hitler a great leader. In other words, I think the word "a great," when you attach the word "great" to leader, means a very, very, very good leader. He might have been a great villain, a great despot. He might have had great evil, but I wouldn't call him a great leader. He was because a great leader is a good leader. A leader who brought justice, who brought peace, who brought economic flourishing to a society, to a country, to the world. That's a great leader. And so when we talk about greatness, we're talking about something that in its essence is guided by profound, loving intention to make the world a better place. So I'm going to pick up where I left off, but I want to take a break right here, and we'll be back before we close out the show.
This is Arthur D. Schwartz. Beliefs and disbeliefs can be very powerful. Much like philosophy, hypnotism is concerned with belief. Hypnotherapy, a practical application of hypnotism, may largely be described as the practice of removing false beliefs that form mental blocks to success, to happiness, and to well-being. In my hypnotherapy and philosophical counseling practice, I combine my work in philosophy with hypnotism in order to clear mental blockages that can occur on both conscious and subconscious levels. A mental block may be conscious or subconscious and can be expressed, for example, in the form of anxiety, low self-esteem or low motivation, bad habits, tobacco habits, weight gain, low performance, and much more. If you are interested in using hypnosis and the power of the mind to overcome mental blocks and barriers that have emerged in your life, please feel free to give me a call at 617-964-4800 or visit www.integralhypnosis.com. That's INTEGRAL hypnosis.com.
In Ethical Empowerment, Virtue Beyond the Paradigms, Arthur D. Schwartz presents an ethical theory that is a framework for evaluating moral conundrums that go beyond legalistic rulemaking, dogmatism, and preconditioned thinking. The book is as much an ethical framework for unconventional ideas as it is for staying with convention. Ethical Empowerment is a manifesto of non-doctrinaire perspective. Ultimately, the hypnotic thinking of ideology and dogmatism can only be overcome by returning to the true source and essence of morality, which is nothing less than universal love. Discover how the philosophically liberating approach of the ethical empowerment can be applied to the range of ethical, social, and political controversy. Read about a plan to eliminate all political parties. Entertain the possibility of an overhaul of the patent system and its replacement with a system that rewards inventors while eliminating monopolistic control of patents and technological suppression. Many other transformative ideas are discussed in the book, including issues related to the monetary system, real estate, scientific paradigms, and a rational approach to conspiracy theory. While ethical empowerment will challenge your mind to consider new perspectives, the ethical challenge is always to keep the diversity, depth, and breadth of perspective within the boundaries of love. Ethical Empowerment is available at Amazon.com and most online booksellers in both print and e-book editions. Thanks for joining us on this installment of Philosophic Perspectives on Artist First Radio. Let's get back to your host, Arthur D. Schwartz.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We'll be closing up the show pretty soon. I just want to make a comment. I started talking about superheroes. I must say, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I love the new Supergirl show. And it's such a really charming show. I didn't really, I've never been a comic book reader. I've, of course, seen the Superman movies and so forth. But that show is really, it really has a gentle touch. I mean, obviously it's taking, a feminist sort of view towards a superhero, but to me, it's as real as a superhero movie can be. I find it charming, and I'm kind of hooked on it. I watch every show. So good job, Supergirl. Melissa Benoist, I think the young actress's name, and the whole crew. I think they're doing a great job. That probably makes no sense in the context of what I was saying, really. But it was because these superhero shows do. I mean, they do serve to inspire us and use our imagination, and they do play out, these kind of moral plays, so to speak. Obviously the Superman, is defending, truth, honor, and the American way, I think. So, anyway, it's a great show. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about what I do call the world society. I was talking about it before. I think a world government would be a catastrophe of the highest order. But a world society is the idea of a unified, cooperative society where each part helps the other freely and effortlessly, like a friend would help another friend, or a family member would help a family member. That day, I believe in the bottom of my heart, is coming. And so I want to try to explain what I mean by that. In my view, as I said many times, I don't believe in one currency. I have a sense of currency where there's a world currency board would stabilize values because they would be objectively evaluating different currencies and setting it in reference to a gold standard, but would be always kind of in sync because it's relational to the different currencies would be, it's not really a gold standard per se, but to the price, it would be relative to the price of gold, so there'd be a constancy there. And now I'm not going to go into any more detail, but I've talked about that before. But I think that's actually an important thing. I think what's happened since Nixon took us off the gold standard, our economy has been steadily getting worse. Now, let me just go here a little bit here. I'm not sure if there's anything here I want to... I can't. I actually talk about how I see the world society develop in an evolutionary process, step by step. One thing I would say that, however, is with the changes I'm suggesting, with the transfer of real estate to the public sector, with the boundaries of nations disappearing and being replaced by cooperation, there is hope for the demilitarization of society. For one thing, governments won't have all this money to waste on arms because they'd be locked into the revenue produced by real estate. They can't just continually jack up taxes to make more bombs. Countries would have to live within their means, and that's the way it should be. I think there would be enough money for the world to live peacefully and to have all its needs met. But I don't think there's ever going to be enough money to finance the military spending that we now have today. It's through the roof. I mean, it's just completely out of control. Now, I know in today's world, I mean, I favor it. I mean, we have enemies like ISIS and so forth. I mean, I understand that. But I'm looking towards far into the future. I don't know how far, but it's in the future. And I think looking into the future is an important thing to do. Because when we look into the future, it's like when you meditate and picture who you want to be and strive to become that person. And I think that's what the world needs to do. Look ahead. Of course, I'm talking about a framework which is guided by love, not by hate, not by destruction, but by love, meaning greatness, meaning wanting the very best for yourself and for your neighbor, for your community and for the world, for the cooperative reciprocity of the whole thing. Cooperation and competition are not contradictory. There's room for both. And when we look into the future and we can see a world that dedicates itself to greatness, the greatness of you, the greatness of me, the greatness of our community, the greatness of the human species, the greatness of our kindness and of our compassion, the greatness of our quest for knowledge and ingenuity and creativity, to the commitment to make sure that happens, that not to be tied down by idiotic, moronic, stupid, false, artificial divisions that oftentimes have been represented by the political parties, by religions, and by nation states. And return to the essence of what it makes to make human life and peace, whatever it takes to make it tick. What makes the world tick soundly, peacefully. And in philosophy, we can do these kinds of things. But you know what? I don't think it's so far-fetched. I don't think it's so far-fetched at all to believe that these things are possible. And you know what? The world is in such a state right now that we really are, there is a possibility that we're not going to make it. Many people think that. I think that's possible as well, but I'm more optimistic. I believe we are going to make it. And the reason I believe we're going to make it because I do believe that in the end, love will prevail. So I think with that, we are going to conclude tonight's broadcast. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope it's a great one for you, for health, be healthy, and to be happy, and to have a joyful year ahead. And so for links to my book, Ethical Empowerment, my philosophical counseling and hypnotherapy practice, and the Social Philosophizers Club, please visit arthurdschwartz.com. I wish to thank Scott very much once again for engineering the show. And now this is Arthur D. Schwartz reminding you to live well and think deeply. Until next time, good night, everybody.